In today's video, we're going to talk about how to build and deploy a Java web application using Jenkins. Are you new here? If you are, welcome. And if you are new here, you don't know who I am. My name is Darren Pope, and I'm a developer advocate for CloudBees, Java. It's everywhere. You may have been using it since it came out in 1996, 1997. Depends on who you talk to. Java is one of the most ubiquitous languages that are used to create web applications even in 2021. So, you're on to a new team. You find out that they're using Spring Boot. You say, great, no problem. And then all of a sudden, you are tasked with doing the build and release process for this application. That's what we're going to go through today. I'm going to show you a very simple way using Spring Boot to create a Docker image and deploy it to Heroku. Here's where we're starting today. I have a Jenkins controller version 2.277.3. When it was installed using install suggested plugins, meaning no extra plugins have been installed on this controller. I also have an agent with the label of Linux. Now on this agent, I have installed two commands. Number one, I've installed Docker so we can build the Docker image. Number two, I've installed the Heroku CLI. I have a sample application. The link to this repository will be down in the description below. Here's the repository that I just referenced. If you want to go take a look at it, it's at github.com/darrenpope/java-web-app. Now, this was created using start.spring.io. It was a very basic and simple example. I did Maven, Java. I selected 2.4.5 at the time of the recording. This is the current GA version. I left all of the default values here, and I added just one item. And that one item was Spring Web. And that was it. And then I clicked on Generate, and that gave me a zip file that I was able to extract into my repository right here. Now, there were two extra files that I added to this repository. Let's take a look at them. The first one is Dockerfile. Since we are going to be packaging the application as an image, I'm using a Dockerfile, since we have Docker on our agent, to be able to build this image. This Dockerfile, let me give you a little secret. I actually did not write this Dockerfile, at least not from scratch. Down in the description are two links to some documentation on the Spring Boot site. The first one is Spring Boot with Docker. And you can go through and read this and understand better how Spring Boot and Docker works. But then there's also this link to the topical guide on Docker. And if you go to that page, you're going to find a section called multi-stage build. So what I did is I copied this Docker file and made a couple of small changes. The only big changes I made were the from option. Instead of using OpenJDK 8, if you take a look at it, I am using adopt OpenJDK 11. So I did that for both this from and this from. And finally, since I know that I am deploying to Heroku, I needed to add in one extra parameter here because with Heroku, I need to be able to pass the port into the startup process. Other than these three items at line 1, line 12, and this one little section here of 18, everything is exactly the same as this section about multi-stage builds. If you've never worked with multi-stage builds before, I want you to go back and read this really closely and understand why a multi-stage build is really, really powerful. Because if you've never used them before, it will be life-changing. Also over in the repository, I added, not surprisingly, a Jenkins file. Let's take a look at the Jenkins file. Now this one I did write. So if we take a look at it, you can see that we're using our agent with the label of Linux. Remember, our agent has both Docker and the Heroku CLI on it. On my controller, I am going to need to set up a credential, which is going to be the Heroku API key. This Heroku API key is actually a magical environment variable. When a system has this environment variable set, The Heroku CLI will use this environment variable as the authentication against Heroku. I've set up an app name here. We'll look at this a little bit later, but let's look at what we're doing here. If you've watched the other videos about Docker Hub, this is going to look very similar. Because we are deploying to Heroku, the image has to exist within the registry at Heroku. We are unable to pull it from Docker Hub in order to run the image. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building the Docker image locally. So you can see here, I'm just doing a Docker build and tagging it. Then we do a login to the Heroku registry. Now, you may say, okay, this looks weird. That's not a real username. That's just an underscore. This password standard in. Okay, I watched that other video before. I sort of get that. And then the registry domain. Well, where does this come from? Also down below the description, there is some documentation to Heroku about how this works. So if we take a quick look at it, typically what you would do is a Heroku container login. That would be equivalent to Docker login. And then you would do a container push, that's Docker push, and container release, which means it releases it. But let's take another look at this. To log into the registry is container login. But that's an interactive login. So I can't just use the API key to log in there. So in order to be able to log in through our Jenkinsfile, I needed to use Docker login. Other than that, everything is the same. When we create the image, let's go back to our Jenkinsfile. I've logged in. Now I need to do a tag and a push. Again, this is documented within this documentation, pushing an existing image because we've built it locally. So I say Docker tag. I use the existing tag and give it the new tag. And here's the thing to remember. This is the key part. And it's called out in the process type. So in my case, let's go back to Jenkinsfile. I have my tag, which was the tag that I used right here when I actually did the build. And then I give it a new tag, which is fully qualified registry.heroku.com, the app name, which is the parameter that we are going to pass in, and then in my case, web, because I'm using a web process type. There are two different process types. There's a web on Heroku and there's a worker. So our process type is web. Okay, so far so good. And then we get down to releasing the image. So then we would say Heroku container release web. It would either be web or worker, and we give it the app name. So the CLI is smart enough to know what to do with that. And then finally, in the post always, I'm always logging out. This is a very, very simple Jenkins file. Take a look at it again real quick, at least from the stages part. We're doing a build, a login, a tag, a push, and a container release, which will release it into Heroku. The only other two items, the Heroku API, which we'll set up in just a moment, and we have a parameter for our app name. This will become clear in just a moment. I've logged into my Heroku account, and I'm going to create a new app. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, couldn't you create a new application from within your Jenkins file? I could, but because I want to be able to deploy back to the same application time and time again, I'm just going to manually create it here. Do I need to? No. Could I have done it a different way? Yes. But this is what we're going to do today. So I'm going to click on Create a New App, and I'm going to give it a name of Java Web App Dash, and I'm going to give it some random 5-digit character. It doesn't have to be 5. That's just their standard, so I'm sticking with the standard. And I'm going to click on Create App. And at this point, I have created the application. This is all that I need to do. Now, if you want to take a look at it, you can look at Container Registry. If you click on this entry here, and it will tell you step by step what you need to do. We've already taken a look at the documentation. This is basically a simplified look at what we just looked at in the documentation for container, and then whatever. Now we need to go and get the API key from Heroku. And you may be saying to yourself, Darren, are you sure you want to show me your API key? I'm okay with it right now. You will understand why in just a moment. So I'm going to go down here, and there's an SSH key that you can't see, but let's reveal my API key. So if you go to your account, scroll all the way to the bottom, you will see API key. I'm going to click on reveal, and this is my API key. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put that off to the side. What you won't see afterwards is I'm coming in here and clicking on regenerate, so you actually won't know my API key. Now that I have my API key, let's go back over to our controller and create a credential for this key. So we'll go to Dashboard, Manage Jenkins. Oh, I timed out. Oh well, let's log back in. Okay, Manage Jenkins, Manage Credentials. Let's add a credential. Now, what kind of credential do I need to create? Since this is an API token, all I need to use is secret text. The secret value is going to be my API key. Let me grab that. And I'm going to give it an ID of Darren Pope Heroku API key. This ID and description are the same value as what I have here in the credentials. Okay, so far so good. Let's go ahead and save that. So now we have our secret text with Heroku API key. Now what we need to do is set up a multi-branch job. Sure, I could have used a different job type, but I'm using multi-branch just for simplicity. It's a new item. I'm going to go call it Java Web App. I'm going to go down to multi-branch, click OK. For my branch source, I'm going to select Git. And for my project repository, let's go back over to GitHub. And let me copy my URL. It looks good. Project repository. Okay, still following? Good. Let's click on Save. It's going to go out and scan the repository. It's going to find the Jenkinsfile on the main branch. Again, I'm not thinking versioning. I'm not thinking multiple environments. This is just a very, very simple, straight from point A to point B type use case. Your real life use case is going to be more complex. But hopefully this is a building block that you can use to move you to what you need to do. All right, let's take a look at Java Web App. Click on Main. Let's look at what happened with the red ball. That's interesting. Matching. Okay, so let's get into this. Docker build. It looks like the build worked fine. Tagged it. That's good. Our Docker login. Login succeeded. That's good. Oh, here's the reason why. The first time this application ran, let's go back and take a look at our Jenkinsfile again. Remember, there was a parameter. But when the scan occurred, there was no parameter for us to type in because it did an automatic scan. Let's go back over to our controller. That was simple. So that one failed, but now you can see here that this is build with parameters. We didn't even get the option to do anything with build number 1. So I'm going to click on build with parameters, and the app name is what we need to put here. So what is the Heroku app name? Well, let's go see what it is. I'll go back over here. I'm going to click on there. And our app name is actually the name of this slug that's right here. Just to prove that, I'll click on settings and you can see app name is right here. Could I change the app name? Yes. Am I going to? No, don't need to. So there is my app name. Let's go back into Jenkins. Let's paste this in and click on build. Now, while we're waiting on this to build, let's take one more quick look at our application. So I'm going to go to source, main, Java, and demo application. I have a very simple page living at the root of the application / and it's just going to return Docker, or it's just going to return hello Docker world. So we'll see if this works in just a moment. Let's go back over to the job. You can see 2 is running right now. So we do our build, do our login. We see that the image has been pushed up to the registry.heroku.com. So we're just waiting on this to complete. We can see here after it finished, it did a release to this application. It says it's done, and then we did a Docker logout. So it appears that the job is successful. Now, why did that take so long? Well, it could be my internet. I am running locally right now. Maybe there was a hiccup on the Heroku side. I don't know. But I want you to take a look at something that we're going to come back and revisit in just a moment. Notice that we have our build, we have our copies, and then we have our push. Well, we have our tag and then our push. We're preparing, waiting, and pushed. Remember this sequence: preparing, waiting, and pushed. You'll see why in a few moments. Okay, let's go and take a look at our application. So on the same settings, there's at about halfway down, you can click on this link. And you can see here, although it's small, it says, "Hello, Docker World." So our application built, pushed to Heroku, and then we released it. The dyno spun up, and we have our application running. Now let's make a change to our endpoint and create a much more useful message. Okay, so let's go back over here. We'll say vi source, main, Java, demo application. So instead of doing a return hello Docker world, the much more useful message is going to be hello Docker world, exclamation point. Right? That's much more useful. Just making sure. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a git add, git commit. This is going to be a much better message. And I'm going to do a git push. Now, I do not have webhooks set up in this test case today, so I need to go back over to my controller and run the job again. But I want you to remember what this looks like: preparing, waiting, and pushed. Let's run the job. Build with parameters. Let me grab my app name again. This is the reason why I have the app name, so you can practice this however you want. I'm going to click on build. Let's see what happens here. Docker build, all of that's pretty straightforward. We're doing our build. Maven is doing its Maven thing. Let's keep going. Lots of Maven things. I'll just let this fast forward. And now it's complete. Before we review the log, let's go make sure the app did what we expected. So if I refresh the app, now we can see that it's hello Docker world, exclamation point, a much better message. But let's go take a look at the log. This is where multi-stage and good image hygiene comes into play. What you'll notice here is it does all the preparing, waiting, and then we get layer exist, or layer already exists. And there was actually only one layer that got updated. Why did this happen? It's actually pretty simple. Because of the Dockerfile and the way that it's written right here, 15, 16, and 17, when we copied from build to the image, which is what we have here, these two layers did not change because there was nothing new inside of bootinflib or metainf. The only thing that changed was what was in our classes. When it was copied into app, that's the only thing that got copied over. So now instead of baking a full new image and pushing it up all the time, I can see here that by correctly creating my Dockerfile, I can manage or potentially eliminate the amount of network traffic that I'm having to incur because layers already exist. Let's do one more thing. Let's go run the job one more time. Now you'll notice before we run it, you can see here releasing images web to Java Web App 14.839. Let's click on main. We'll run it one more time. I want you to see what happens when we build something where there were no changes at all. Let's say somebody just went in and they clicked on it and they weren't sure. That's okay. Notice how fast that was. So it does our build. We do our login. Remember, just a few seconds ago, we were talking about layers already exist. Well, all the layers exist. So this image is exactly the same as the previous image. If we take a look at Heroku Container Release Web this time, it's trying to release the image, but the process type web was not updated because it is already running the specified Docker image. The image is exactly the same as the one before. So if you release something that's exactly the same, then nothing will happen when the release phase occurs. I may have gone a little bit deep there with you towards the end, talking about the Docker files, or maybe you're not even using Spring Boot. Whether you're using Heroku, or using a service from Google Platform, or Amazon Web Services, or Microsoft Azure, it doesn't really matter. What you're able to do is in building your Java web application, and in my case, I packaged it as an image. So that means my deployment target was going to be some form of container runtime. So if you're looking for a simple way to build and deploy Java web applications using this process to where you have a multi-stage Dockerfile and you have a very simple container runtime environment to deploy that image to, you're going to be able to more quickly create value for your customers. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter at CloudBeesDevs. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on that subscribe button, and ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there's new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.